Hello, and welcome to Heart of Steamboat's Fast Forward. My name is Maggie Taylor, and today we're taking a dive into the whimsical world of Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is a literary classic that was written by Lewis Carroll back in the 1800s and was turned into a movie in 1951, an animated movie by Disney. It's about a young girl named Alice who is daydreaming under a tree, or in a tree, kind of like this one, and in the middle of London. And her sister is trying to teach her lessons being one of a history book. But Alice thinks that's just frankly boring, which many of us might find history boring at times ourselves. And she begins to daydream. And she gets lost in this daydream and ends up wandering down a rabbit hole. And down that rabbit hole, she finds this nonsensical world of her daydreams. She finds a place where there are unbirthdays and Mad Hatters. She finds a place with Cheshire cats and a rabbit who's always worried about time. Also a Queen of Hearts who's worried about her image and always being right. It's an interesting world, but a world that we find out Alice has created for herself as she runs away in her mind from home. Alice's trip down the rabbit hole makes me think sometimes of the parable of the lost sheep. In Matthew and Luke, Jesus tells a parable about a lost sheep talking to his disciples and other religious leaders. He says in Matthew chapter 18, "If you were a shepherd and had a herd of 100 and realized that you only had 99, would you not go and seek the lost sheep? And when it was returned home, would you not rejoice that it had been returned to its flock?" Now, many people, when they think about the lost sheep parable, think about those who have intentionally left faith behind or left goodness behind, those who are caught up in sin, those who are caught up in things that might be harmful to themselves. And I think at times that can be true, right? We have moments in our lives where we leave intentionally from our times of faith. But I think what the lost sheep also might be sharing with us is sometimes we just get caught up. We become like Alice and we end up down a rabbit hole. Maybe not in a nonsensical world as she does, but we end up in this rabbit hole of the things that surround us in life. We end up consumed with our to-do list, like the rabbit. I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye. I'm late. Our to-do lists are so long. We get so caught up in those and we forget where our grounding is. We forget where our home is with that shepherd. Or maybe we're like the Queen of Hearts. Maybe we're so worried about our appearance and how we're viewed by our peers that we forget what grounds us. We forget where home is. We forget who we are, maybe even to some level. And maybe sometimes we're just looking for a direction that we just can't seem to find. And we end up with a Cheshire cat giving us directions, which essentially mean wherever you go will be the direction you're going. A little confusing, isn't it? And I think Jesus going back for the lost sheep or pursuing this lost sheep isn't about pursuing someone who's necessarily chosen to leave or chosen to ignore their faith or chosen to be into trouble, for lack of a better word. I think Jesus has a piece of us in that parable at times of our lives. When we're so worried, when we're so scattered, when we're so into the nonsensical of the day-to-day that we forget what grounds us. I don't think many of us choose to forget or ignore the unconditional love of Christ, but I think it's easy to let it fall to the wayside. I think it's easy to get caught up in our day-to-day and never think about the one constant that so many of us have built our lives on, right? That place where we find home. I believe that as Alice wanders in this beautiful beautiful Wonderland where plants talk to you and there are caterpillars and there's just all of the amazing things that she'd ever dreamt for. She wants to go home. She wants to go back to a place where she's known. She wants to go back to a place where things make sense. She wants to almost go back to a simplicity and a almost boringness that she hated before she went to Wonderland. Her Wonderland, let's remember. And as she dreams and hopes for that, she's working towards getting home, and she realizes that all these directions she's been given just lead her into another debacle and another confusion. And isn't life like that sometimes? The more we search and look for home and grounding, the more we might end up in another debacle or a confusion. But Jesus offers us something that's a little simpler. I believe that Jesus offers us, just as that sheep, home. Jesus offers a place of unconditional love, of respectful care, a place where we're not only called into community, but also called into grace for ourselves and others. Sometimes we get so caught up in our day-to-day that we forget what grounds us. And I think that might be where Alice was too. She was so busy worrying about where this white rabbit was going that she forgot about everything she left behind when she crawled down that rabbit hole, until she got so caught up that she desired to go back. So what are the things that our faith offers us? What are the things that maybe are a part of this grounding home? I think love is one of them. I think we all search for love. Like, who doesn't want to know that they are unconditionally loved in this world? I would say 99.8% of people long for that knowing, that knowledge. I would say another thing that we look for in that grounding is an acceptance of the person we are and the person we're becoming. Alice is probably 9 years old, so she's got a lot of growing in her life to do. And whether you're 9 years old or 90 years old, you're still growing and changing as a person. And the beautiful thing about our faith is that God not only knows us as who we are now and loves us there, but will know us who we are in 15 minutes or 15 years from now, and will know us and love us there. So love, a deep knowledge, and then that acceptance. That place where you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to almost say, this is why I am the way I am. There's this scene in Alice in Wonderland where she finds herself amongst all these flowers. And they're trying to figure out what kind of flower she is. And she said, well, I'm not a flower. I'm a little girl. And they all look at each other and they're like, well, we know what you are. You're a weed. And they chase her out of the flower patch, calling her a weed just because she's different. She doesn't fit the mold. And it's almost at that moment that I relate to this thought of like, wow, if she was in her world, she would fit right in. And I think that world is the place that we call home. That world where we don't have to explain why we're different. We just are. That world where we're accepted for who we are, we're known, and we're loved. And the thing about Alice in Wonderland is she's given everything she wants, everything she says she's dreaming of, this whimsical world. And in the end, she just wants to go home. And as we continue our lives and our day-to-day, we can't necessarily give up the agenda or the to-do list. We can't give up necessarily always thinking about what others think of us. Those things are just part of our journey at times, and that's okay. But what I think Alice in Wonderland reminds us of is that we must be grounded in something to come home to, because we might just lose our head if we don't. No matter if you're late, no matter if you're worried, no matter what your anxieties may be, knowing that you have a place to call home and a place where you feel safe and loved, known and accepted is a critical part of being able to exist in this wild, crazy world that we live in, Wonderland aside. So how do you find that place? I think for me, it begins with accepting those things about yourself, knowing yourself, knowing what it would feel like to be loved in an unconditional way. And then thinking, well, where do I feel that? Where do I feel known and loved and accepted? And I hope that you have that place in mind. But if you don't, I would invite you to start searching for it. Maybe it's a church community. Maybe it's an online community. Maybe it's a community that you find in the place where you live. But wherever that community is, whether it's a faith community or not, I hope that you know that God is there. And that God, no matter where you find that community of peers or community of friends, exists loving you, knowing you, and accepting you in the place you are right now. Maybe you think, I don't have that physical place, but I have that spiritual home. And I think as we grow and as we share and as we learn more about ourselves, including learning more about the scripture, learning more about the world around us, we can find that spiritual home, that spiritual place that we go to when we're caught up in the nonsensical world. At the end of the movie, Alice is in the Queen's court, and she realizes as she's running away from getting her head chopped off, that she just needs to run towards home. But home is this thing that she never really left. She was just asleep. She was just daydreaming. So as you run towards home, run towards a place where you feel loved, you feel known, you feel accepted. And friends, God will be running right towards you to help you feel those things. Because the lost sheep isn't about a sheep that always necessarily left on its own. Maybe it just got distracted. And as we try our best to slow down, to live in this wholehearted, wholly invested manner that we talk about, we must slow down and look for the places God is inviting us into home. They're all around us. They're underneath a tree. They're at a dinner with community. They're hiking in the mountains. They're sitting alone, just drinking a cup of tea, or maybe even having a tea party. The places in which we find ourselves are all opportunities to slow down and to think about home. Where is yours? Maybe share that with a friend. Where do you find home? Where do you feel grounded? Where do you emotionally seek to go back to when you're feeling the chaos of this world? Wherever that is, I would invite you to go into that place and to seek out those places where you find God and God's home for you. Amen.